Okay, so today I'm on the air with Loudmouth Reviewer, a fellow YouTuber, or at least person with a YouTube account, um, who has political views which I thought were quite interesting, and so decided to organize a sort of discussion stream, really, chance to just talk about politics and stuff. So take it
Hooray.
away, Loudmouth. Introduce yourself.
My name is Jim. I just basically occasionally make videos on YouTube. Uh, um, just basically mostly movie reviews. That's really what I kind of started off in, but I also branched out and talked about other topics like what is it? I've done response videos to various different people on both the right and the left. Mostly, if I have a gripe with somebody, like I've done one responding to Paul Joseph Watson, Lauren Southern on the right, and I've also done response videos to Anita Sarkeesian on the left. I did a recent one where I responded to an idiotic article from this crazy feminist who writing for the Guardian. And so, yeah, I try to be a bit balanced. Oh yeah, no bullshit was one. Me and S Man worked together, take down that asshole. And who who else did I respond to? I did one response to Sargon. Yeah, even though I'm pretty center right in my politics, I consider myself a libertarian. I often do call out my side because I figure you got to clean your own house.
Oh, I can understand that line of thought.
Yeah.
So you like you say you're centre right. So you
Generally,
would.
yeah.
So is that like right wing with left wing ideas? Is that leaning a bit right? How would you sort of
I
describe it?
I would probably say I'm a classical liberal is how I'd mostly describe myself. But a more of a liberal in the old school sense, but in the more modern American sense, liberal is kind of more associated with being left wing, whereas I generally believe in free market economics, personal liberties, and
So
all those things are very important to me.
so you would say you advocate for capitalism.
Correct.
Okay. So there's a point of disagreement right off the start.
Yes.
Um,
I do
and
believe capitalism is the most fair, equitable system because although it obviously produces unequal results, it's most efficient because it works very similarly to biological natural selection, where different businesses will try different modes of business and different ways of doing things. And the ones who provide those services in the best way for the consumers, all right, is the one who wins out and makes the most money. So yeah, it also creates a competition system among workers for promotions and raises and what have you, which allows the most efficient workers to deliver the best results. All around, it's proven itself over the millennia to be the most efficient form of economics.
um, so plenty of points of disagreement. But firstly, I would talk about the most efficient line. I
Uh-huh.
would raise a point of contention with the idea that capitalism is the thing producing. Um, I would say that it is labor that produces the goods, the value, and capitalism which merely misappropriates that value from the worker to the capitalist. So, for instance, the workers in a factory produce the cars or the computers or whatever, and the capitalist simply commodifies that labor, profits off it, and makes himself wealthy off the
But
labor.
how would a computer even exist without a system of competition of inventors wanting to one up each other that led to the creation of such a device? The device known as a computer, right? It does things that our ancestors hundreds of years ago would have regarded as sorcery. Like, did you know that the bloodiest battle of the War of 1812, for example, was fought after peace was declared, but neither army got the memo because information traveled so slowly back then. So they all fought a bloody battle after both sides had already declared peace. That shows. Whereas today, in today's world, you just pull your cell phone and be like, "Hey, yeah, we declared peace. You can cut it out right now."
Well, I mean, I'm not denying that computers are helpful. I'm not saying, oh, let's go back to medieval times. What I'm saying is that it's labor that produces the computer, like the labor of workers, the ideas and thoughts of scientists and stuff,
Yes.
that produces these things. Capitalism is not, is not that labor. Capitalism is merely the commodification of that labor to turn into, the profits and capital of the capitalist.
But what
Um,
without the motivation of that profit, what motivates mankind to invent things?
then that's not the motivation, is it? It's not like the computer wouldn't exist if capitalism wasn't around. Like you could still see someone think, oh, well, let's make something that can work out complicated sums and functions for us. Let's do something which can send messages in an instant.
But the reason
Those
why
things.
computers are so much more powerful than they used to be is different computer companies all want to have the latest and greatest chip, all right, in order to get a one up on the competition. That's why computers have advanced at such a massive, phenomenal rate. Whereas throughout most of the 20th century, they double in computing power every 18 months. And that's slowed a bit today because they're running out of room just due to the laws of physics on computer chips to make them much smaller. But throughout most of the 20th century, this fierce competition to have the latest and greatest chip led to an enormous growth in computer power. And that has, you've acknowledged yourself, massively increased our quality of living, this massive increase in power.
However, there's no reason this could not have like I'm not saying that the computer and the existence of the computer is something which is bad, obviously, but the existence that it has had is not because of capitalism. It's because of the labor and the thoughts of people. The capitalist is not the person who comes up with the idea. The capitalist is a person who commodifies that idea and makes the
Without the
most
ability to
capital from it.
commodify it, how does that product become known to the public or distributed to the public? The capitalist who makes a catchy little marketing uh, to brand his product and make it seem like something that you need. That's what Steve Jobs did, for example. He took devices that no one had ever heard of and he made them things that now people can't live without. He convinced you that you need this product. All right. And that really does require a certain kind of finesse and skill. And it's the system of free market competition, the hopes that you'll be the one to break out that really leads to that. Most people most people really don't have the skill. Would you agree that certain people have abilities that other people don't?
Well, everyone has different fields of, abilities and strengths and stuff. Everyone's
Right.
strong in one area and different in
Right.
another.
Well,
But
like,
coming back to something you said, humans are social animals. Then it's not like they're going to just keep themselves to themselves when the potential for better is, potentially there. When we talk about criticizing the system, we're not saying, oh, well, people shouldn't have ideas and shouldn't be trying to make things better. What we're saying is we should not be, privately holding these things for our own profit. We shouldn't be seeing these things as a mere commodity to be exploited. We should be seeing it as, oh, societally, we can all benefit from this. Um, Especially when you consider that the computers and the technology you describe has been created to make a handful of people extremely wealthy, has come through the exploitation and suppression of labor around the world, and is fundamentally actually holding us back in some ways because we're seeing the progress being stunted to maintain the profits and the power of the people who are in control of the form of production. Like for instance, people sort of wanting to keep their technology like back to make sure they can sell as much of the old model of the phone before pushing out the newer model of the phone. But that's not
well,
efficient. That's not.
competition prevents that from happening because if you hold your technology back in order to sell more of the old model, one of your competitors is going to release their new model ahead of you, and he's going to get a huge one up on you. Competition prevents that from happening.
I mean, in theory, but then in practice, because all the companies are, extremely wealthy TNCs, Panasonic, not Panasonic, what? No, Apple, Microsoft. I'm trying to think of corporations, but you're All these corporations want to maximize the profit they can get out of the commodity, which is the old phone. They all do this sort of thing. They all, make
Well, of course
phones
they want to.
designed to. If you just let me finish the sentence,
Sorry.
no worries. They all design these phones like that, and then once they've maximized their sales from that one, they can put the next one out. So yeah, in theory they could, but they all recognize that they can squeeze as much profit out, they can make as much capital as they can from their capital by doing it the old way. They can, like, the ideal, the efficient way is not always the most profitable way, and subsequently, that's gonna profits matter more than of everything else. That's the whole purpose of capitalism. So sadly, the average person is going to miss out on that better technology if it means it makes Mr. Microsoft more money.
Yeah, but as I said before, I still firmly believe, and I think it's been shown several times, that anytime a corporation wants to be set in its old ways and hold things back, they will eventually hurt your bottom line because you won't have the latest and greatest thing. But there is ways to profit off like old school nostalgia. For example, that like when Nintendo like repackages like consoles from decades ago into these little mini units and all these really graphically out of date games, and they still sell them to modern audience, usually adults in their 30s who played them when they were kids and have kind of a nostalgic attachment to the things that are old school, even though it's by all technical reasons way, way, way out of date, and they could easily be playing games that are much more advanced, plenty of them that are much more advanced. So yeah, there is some profit value to doing things the old way as well in certain cases, but at the same time, the main industry will always want to have the latest and greatest thing, and that really will drive society forward. Like, again, back to being biological natural selection. Like every dominant male in like a herd, they all want to have the biggest antlers in order to rule over the whole herd, to dominate the females. All right, and that kind of need to be on top leads to animals being bigger and stronger with each generation. That kind of progressively over the generations, more and more so. That's what drives evolution forward.
Okay, so going back to the start of what you said that eventually corporations would upgrade their technology. Eventually isn't the same thing as most efficient. Efficiency would be to, once utilizing the technology you have for the benefit of everyone, to make it as good as possible, not curtailing your technology because you can make more profit for like a handful of people who are, making fortunes off the company. Which is sort of a point I'm trying to get at, but which is that by allowing capital to be privately held by such wealthy individuals, essentially the financial upper class who have control of these corporations, who own the factories and the mines and all the components which go into making these computers, we're holding ourselves back. We could be further along than we actually are. But because our system is fundamentally based on who has the most capital, and the people who have the most capital are, extremely wealthy and in control of the means of production and stuff, progress can't be done as soon as it could. And it's one thing to say it with like computers and stuff, because computers, yeah, fine, maybe the laptop I'm using now isn't the state of the art amazing, but it's still a pretty good laptop. It still does the job. But when it comes to other things like energy consumption, like housing, like food and drink, when it comes to things which are more crucial to the survival of a human being, then it becomes pretty costly. Then you see the sort of problems we're seeing today, where we've got ecological disaster in some parts of the world, where we've got the worries around the state of our environment and stuff. And that's where the efficiency is just completely lost, because we have a world that views every single thing as a potential commodity, every single thing as a tool for profit. And subsequently, the living lives of people around the world are being affected by the need for capitalists, for wealthy, to make more from their capital, seeing a house that people live in as just a way of squeezing out more profit. I'll let you respond to that actually, but then I want
The
to
well, you're talking about the argument of the negative externalities. That's a common term in economics. That's mostly one used in favor of regulations. That doing things too efficiently in a certain area would create a negative externality that would overall be detrimental to the economy. Like climate change is kind of always seen as an example. But the thing about that is, though, is that in the drive to do things more efficiently, you also are the technological progress that comes as a result tends to do things cleaner, because cleaner in many ways is more efficient. All right. You want to also be able to boast that you have the cleanest form of energy, the wave of the future. Like, for example, in my country, fracking industry has grown immensely in the last couple decades, and that's actually done a good job of shifting energy away from coal towards natural gas, which produces far less carbon dioxide. It's kind of a good example of where protecting the environment and reducing carbon dioxide emissions and capitalist greed kind of go hand in hand.
I mean, with that sort of thing though, whilst there is obviously, as technology improves and time moves on, obviously there is going to be that improvement of things. The more we learn, the better we get and stuff. But
Right.
when the more we learn, when the information is actually going to negate the capital of people who are at the top already. So, for instance, cleaner forms of energy may not benefit the person who controls vast amounts of oil or other fossil fuel sources of energy. That's when we see capital ruling over societal efficiency. So, people actively blocking progress in energy to serve their own capital, because the land is privately owned and they've got the right to pursue their profits however they see fit, because that's what capitalism is ultimately. That's when societally we're all sort of losing out just to serve the capital of the wealthy. It's what fracking itself, it's not as though it's being done because it's the great new step to the future. It's actually got quite a lot of problems to it. And actually
Yes,
results.
but its positives outweigh those problems. The fact that it leads to energy production that relies on less carbon dioxide emissions is a huge benefit that far negates the problems. All energy production, all production in general, there's always some type of negative externality to it. But the question is, do those positive results outweigh them? And I would argue they do.
Well, even so, it's not exactly like a clean form of energy in the sense of like, end product and stuff. But coming back to what I was saying, even if it was a much better way of doing things and something that's potentially good, whilst we have this system of capitalism, the capital of the capitalists, the wealthiest people, the people who have control of the means of production and stuff, are they going to use their capital to block this change? If you're going to say, oh, well, we can improve our ecological impact by using this method, and that goes against the capital of people who say have a massive oil stock and want to use all that to make themselves as much money as possible. Like we're not going to see that happen, which is why, despite the clear obvious effects of global warming and the clear danger and precarious situation we're heading into, and we're perhaps already in, if you ask some people,
Yeah.
we're gonna lose we're gonna lose the state of the planet even more, because it's not like we can just click our fingers and sort of start again. It's just not what's gonna happen. We're gonna be in a like perilous situation.
Yes, like I've heard of one argument for preserving natural spaces is to basically turn them into actually commoditizing them actually benefits them. Like, what's the difference between cows and rhinoceroses? There's hundreds of millions of cows, and rhinoceroses are on the brink of extinction because cows are a commodity. They're farmed for their resources, in which case meat, milk, what have you, whereas rhinoceroses are not. Would a society that, say, farmed rhinoceroses and sold their horns and bred them in mass the same way we do cows, there probably would be a lot more rhinoceroses in the end. So commoditizing a certain aspect of the natural world can actually propagate that aspect.
But again, that's not an argument that is really in favor of capitalism. That's literally saying that the life of this living species on our planet is only valuable if it makes another, the wealthy money.
It's ultimately about, I'm looking at trying to look at things pragmatically. I mean, we've banned the hunting of these animals. We spend lots of money, often taxpayer money, to try to protect them, and yet people still keep shooting them. So what's an alternative solution to keeping such a creature alive?
Well, two things. Firstly, pragmatism, obviously it's great. It's obviously important to look at the situation at hand and react to it. However, that doesn't exclude systemic criticism. And ultimately, if we're, like you said, millions of cows worldwide, many countries have more cows than people in them, and
Yes.
rhinos on the verge of extinction. I believe some, was it the black rhino? The last one died recently?
Yeah, the western black rhino, a certain subspecies. Yeah, they have actually declared it likely to be extinct.
Yeah, no,
it's not really known for sure. There have been some instances where extinct animals have turned out not to be extinct, but of course that rarely happens.
Yeah, of course, and it's awful that these things happen. But to describe them as not commodified, to say, to ask, oh, why are people still hunting them despite the fact we have laws against it? That ultimately comes down to the system we have, where anything can be a commodity. The rhino's horn is made of what? Ivory. Ivory is a valuable...
that's actually false. Elephant's tusks are made of ivory. The rhino's horn is actually made of keratin, which is pretty much the same. It's actually the same material your fingernails are made of. And that's one of the more frustrating things about why rhinos are hunted. They sell rhino horns in 8 parts of Asia as a cure for cancer. Rhino horns do not cure cancer. You're about as likely to cure cancer from biting your fingernails.
Well, I mean, you learn something new every day.
I watch a lot of programs about animals. I know more than I should, probably.
I know all knowledge is good.
Yes.
But yeah, rhinos, are clearly have market value. Their parts are commodified and turned into a money-making scheme, which is ultimately, it's just someone seeing the rhino as their potential capital, and subsequently, fine, they break some laws, but if they make money out of it, then they're okay with it. And yeah, it's a disgusting thing that happens, but it's a symptom of the system we have, where any moral, any wrong can be superseded by the need to accrue capital. We look at the fact we have so many types of animals dying, and so many people completely callous and ignorant of this fact, and seemingly even apathetic to the fact that we're seeing levels of extinction unheard of.
Correct. Saying we're currently in the throes of another mass extinction. Some scientists actually believe that. Ultimately, though, the real politically incorrect truth of the matter is the reason why all these animals are dying is just because there are way too many humans. It's simple as that. The planet really cannot sustain the population we have, and unless humanity can get their numbers under control, unless they can curb their birth rates, this is going to keep getting worse. That it's really not really a matter of capitalism or socialism or what have you. It's really just a matter of overpopulation.
Well, see, that's where I fundamentally disagree, really, because whilst obviously we are in an ecological disaster, we do actually have enough land and enough food for everyone to get by. The problem is not quantity; it's distribution. When we see people with vast quantities of wealth, seemingly more than billions of people put together, that is the sort of problem, where all this wealth and resource just sits unspent or unused, food, sitting in a supermarket rotting away, and then people, going hungry or cramped into a ridiculously small amount of land, whilst a massive amount of land elsewhere is owned by a handful of people. The problem is never, going to be quantity when we have such a vast and wide planet. It's always going to be our distribution. The fact that people at the
But
bottom of
ultimately,
society
every
are
human.
ultimately. Sorry, I'll let you speak in a second. Just let me finish.
Sorry.
No worries. The fact that people are cramped into the bottom percentile of society economically, so in such vast numbers, whilst so much of the planet's resources are controlled and not even used by the top tier of society, the wealthy, the capitalists. It's not, overpopulation should not be an issue on a planet where we have so much. The problem is distribution, and that ultimately comes down to the capitalist system of society.
But even if every human on the planet only lived at their very basic needs, all right, every single human requires a lot of resources to be devoted in order to live to adulthood. It requires a good number of a big land of farm in order to feed himself, to sustain him from birth till death. He requires, he will create probably a massive carbon footprint, what have you. Every human life basically takes up a certain amount of resources. That's all right. And resources are ultimately finite. Here's a question. Why do we age? Why do we eventually grow old and die?
You're asking me this now. Well, we're organisms, aren't we? And we are. I'm trying to think back to GCSE biology now. We Our bodies are organisms and they decay. Something like that. I
Not
can't remember,
that's
to be honest. But
yes. I actually once made this mistake as well when I was arguing with a religious person on the second law of thermodynamics, and basically I likened us growing old and dying to a car wearing out. But if you think about it, you work the exact opposite way a car does. All right, with a car, the less you drive it, the more. All right, and the more you better you keep it fueled, the longer it lasts. With a human, all right. If you just try to sit around and eat too much all day, you drastically lower your lifespan. That all right. That kind of shows we would work completely differently than a car. We don't run out the way the law of thermodynamics does. We don't degrade. We are specifically in our genes programmed by natural selection to die. And that programming is there for a reason, for the health of the population, to prevent overpopulation. It's simple as that. If we didn't age and die eventually, well, there would be way too many of us, and we'd eventually destroy our own environment because through overpopulation. All right. So basically natural selection favors us not living long.
the thing is, though, sorry, were you going to say more?
Yeah. Well, but we've gotten good at getting around the barriers natural selection has put on us. That's why our population has exploded. It hasn't exploded because the birth rate has risen. It's exploded due to a massive decline in the death rate, thanks to things like vaccines, modern medicine, better standard of life. These have all led to a massive decline in the death rate, and thus the Earth's population has exploded. So we've gotten around the barriers natural selection has put in our way.
Well, to that I say, why can we not adapt further? It's not like we have to just accept, oh, well, nature's like this. We have to cull our birth rate and overpopulation is a big thing. It's like, well, evolution is about adapting. So, let's adapt and make it so that we don't need to sort of create the problems of, oh, we've not got enough resources or we've not got enough stuff, and address the system which is perhaps curtailing the societal well-being of people as a whole. We've got enough resources on the earth to support 8, 9, maybe even 10 billion people. And yeah, people, obviously, humans aren't meant to last forever, but who says we have to stop with what nature intended? Yeah, we have science, we have technology, we have furthered our society far more than any other organism on the planet.
Sure.
So why stop with this? Why accept the, even if this argument was, um, in defense of the system as it is, why stop there? Simply because it's, what tradition has described for, our species. Why not push ourselves further and improve society even more?
Well, are you familiar with an insect called the Rocky Mountain locust?
No, sadly
Well,
not.
the Rocky Mountain locust in the 1800s was an extremely prosperous insect. Okay. There used to be clouds of these insects that were so thick, full of billions upon billions of them, it would block out the sun. All right. And clouds of those insects would destroy the western United States, devastate cropland. Okay. So once was an extremely prosperous organism, one that really was individually incredibly fit, one that could terraform its environment to its needs, kind of similar to we do. Today, the Rocky Mountain locust is extinct. All right. The reason why is because it was too fit, too able to adapt to its environment, too able to propagate itself in an unsustainable level, and eventually devastate its environment, which led to a population crash. Do you kind of see the issue there?
Oh no, I understand that, obviously, like, if things just grow and grow and grow, eventually there's not enough
There's eventually
to.
there's a finite amount of resources on this planet. There's only so many humans this planet can sustain.
However, it's not as though we cannot also increase our science. We're already seeing the first inroads into artificially growing certain foods, like artificial meat, for instance.
Yeah, I've
Um,
heard of that.
there's more. It's like we can grow crops artificially, and obviously, it's not like it's just a click of a finger away, but it's getting there. And with a societal effort to coordinate this, it could continually growing. It's like, imagine 100 years ago saying, "Oh, in the future, we'll be able to speak to each other via, bits of metal and stuff, and we'll, live to over 100, and we'll have giant screens with images on it moving around." It's like they thought, "Oh, well, what are you on about? It's you're thinking of a utopia." And look where we are today. We're always capable of progressing, and yeah, obviously we need to heed the lessons of the past and look at, the science around species which have grown too quickly and then, fallen. But at the same time, that shouldn't mean that we should be being ultimately, trapped in the sort of, "Oh, we can't do too much progress, we can't go too far." We should always be looking to improve. And, going back to sort of the capitalist point, even on a basic level, we need to improve from the system, because if we're going to talk about, harming our species, what, greater cause of harm is there than one which is, actively destroying the planet in the name of accumulating profit, actively curtailing the lives of people to make sure the wealthy can squeeze enough, capital out of them, commodifying the labor of people to be, turning them into cogs as mere, the mere tools for a multinational corporation to exploit. Let's look at the harm that our system is doing and improve upon that as well as ourselves, and subsequently improve life for everyone.
Well, does you talk about corporations, particularly? I mean, like sweatshop factories in the third world, for example, kind of commoditizing and exploiting these people. Yet a lot of the factories that they open up, yes, big capitalists do earn money from them, but they dramatically actually increase the standard of living versus what was there before. I mean, working in a sweatshop, it sucks by most Western standards, but their lives were improved. Whereas before, a lot of them had to till the fields with vastly substandard technology and only grow a very small amount of food. Many had to resort to prostitution to survive. All right, and sweatshop labor factories, all right, the opening of them has actually improved the lives of people in those regions.
Okay, so a few things. Firstly, just because things, what am I saying? It's a very streamlined and Western centric, sort of ignorant, really, view to sort of say, "Oh, things have got better because, they're a bit more civilized and stuff." When, yeah, fine, they've gone from using a hoe to using a more scientifically, efficient tool, but the quality of life and the happiness has gone down. You've gone from more traditional cultures and stuff, and a way of life which, yeah, fine, maybe didn't produce as much, but was, still a way of life where people were happier, to one where they're, controlled by a corporation, told you will not, you'll suffer unless you work for us and sell your labor to us. Has given horrific length shifts for what basic basic human needs given back in return. Like, oh, you've got a bed, like, great. You've got a meal at the end of the day. Whoopee. It's like, it's not exactly treating him as anything more than just a cog with a little bit of oiling and stuff. Meanwhile, the capitalist, who owns this business, is making millions, sometimes even billions. You only have to look at how wealthy Nike and Adidas and Reebok and all those sort of massive chains are, in terms of wealth, and then you look at what is going on in the third world. And even if even if you accept the idea that their lives are just somehow bettered by being turned into de facto slaves in these factories, that doesn't make it okay. That doesn't change the whole process and the whole reason these corporations are so wealthy, comes from the exploitation. And we talk about Western standards. The only reason these things are happening in the rest of the world and not in the West is because workers in the West fought against these things happening, and because eventually the power of labor movements made it so that these corporations weren't able to do this. These capitalists were given a firm no, we will not stand for you doing this. So instead, neoliberalism and the late stage capitalism ships it off to other parts of the world where the governments are easier to exploit, where the countries aren't as in any position to sort of say, oh, well, no, we're not going to accept this. So what you end up seeing is extremely exploitative conditions made to benefit a handful of people in that country, and make corporations extremely wealthier, which is how, going back full circle, these corporations can sort of frame the conversation as, oh, we've improved their way of life, and oh, we've made um we've made these people wealthier, and ignore the actual reality of the situation, which is that they've essentially handed them a lifetime of being stuck in these factories, whilst they get to live lives of luxury built off the labor of others. And sorry to sort of go on for ages, but it's important to sort of get to the bottom of this sort
yeah,
of position.
but you talk. Yes, the people who move these factories in there, they do live certainly much more wealthy lives, but ultimately, does it really matter in the end if their actions do lead to more humans in the third world having an objectively improved standard of living? Does it really matter if their motivations were benevolent or selfish? Ultimately, the results of their actions speak for itself. The results show a net benefit to humanity. People who now able to feed their families who previously would have been scrapping for food on the streets. People, all right, women being able to living a life of dignity in a factory instead of having to work as prostitutes for a living. These are all net benefits to humanity. These are people's lives being improved. And they're not, you call them de facto slaves. They're not slaves. They can find, if their old way of life was working better for them, they're still able to do that. The existence of these factories don't change that. They just give people more options.
Okay, so again, I was onto a few things. I find it quite ignorant to sort of frame the conversation as, oh, but these people they can feed their families, now they can avoid lives of destitution on the streets. It's like it wasn't as though it was just sticks and mud and stuff when before the corporation showed up. It's proper cultures there and stuff. These countries are, there's like, it's not as though it's like a different race of people. It's just different culture. It's not Western, essentially. And to sort of impose the Western idea of liberal, oh well, they have these specific things which we've identified as good. is very misleading. GDP is a prime example of this. People often say, "Oh, well, the GDP is quite high and it's improving and it's raising, so that means that it's good." Well, that's an average, and anyone who is sort of adept with mathematical averages can tell you that you can just put a quite a high number into a set of low values and raise the mean quite considerably. A more accurate average to use for this example would perhaps be the median or the mode, which would show you perhaps the extent to which has actually changed in these countries in which people are sort of trapped in these jobs because of their lack of actual wealth. Which brings me on to my next point. When I mention that they're de facto slaves, you're correct in saying that they could leave, but realistically, are they going to? These factories control the means of production. They control the land, they control the resources, they are the predominant economic powerhouse in that region, and thus they are the people offering them jobs with any sort of substantial pay. So subsequently, if a person says, "Oh,
Hold
no,
on, I gotta use the bathroom. I'll be right back."
No worries. I just have to try and hold ship. Let's read the chat whilst Loudmouth is away. It's pretty busy. Wow. I've been tagged in something. Julia Fisher says, "Hey, can you ban LSJ from chat? They're repeatedly insulting folk in debate, being socially uncharitable." Gosh, wow. It's like it's quite a long conversation. Well, I'm reading it, and it looks as though it's more just a conversation about stuff than anything perhaps hateful. Having said that, LSJ, perhaps be a little bit less vitriolic, I guess. I mean, I'm not I've not obviously read the whole thing, so I'm a little bit out of the know with it. But anyhow, some random geek. Oh, hello. Who else is here? Carl, Common Sense Guy, Booming in the Gallo. Oh yeah, wow, 10 people watching. Yeah, no, it's going well. It is still roasting here, honestly. Like I may sound a little bit monotonous today, but that's solely because it's
all right. I'm back.
Brilliant. Okay. Where was I? What was I saying before you left? What can you do? De facto slaves. Yeah. Okay, so they don't have to work there, but if they don't, they're not going to have a substantial income. They're not going to have an alternative that offers them the things they need to survive. The things that any human needs: food, water, shelter, and subsequently, these privatized, privately owned things are held by the capitalists. The same people who are in control of the jobs, of the means of production, and thus the worker has no choice but to accept these contracts, because if they don't, then how are they going to survive? So it's an unspoken force in a sense. It's not like literally, "Oh, you are my slave." It's you're realistically, if you want to survive, you're going to accept these conditions, and the conditions are atrocious. Living in essentially what amounts to like a prison, basically. Working horrific shifts and having very no striking rights, no unions. Often these corporations employ like private enforcers of sorts to keep the people in line. It's very like tedious, monotonous work. It's not like there's no real benefits to it beyond scraping by. And for what? To make the wealth of the the capitalists wealthier. That's not all right. And any potential, even if there was a potential societal net benefit, there's no reason for this all to be happening. There's no reason for all these people to be treated like cogs just so that a handful of people back in the West could be wealthier. Let's talk about the net benefit. There's no reason the technological progress we've seen in the last century could have could not have happened under a different system where people aren't treated like spare parts in a machine and sort of discarded the minute they're seen as not as valuable. There's no reason we could we had to colonize the rest of the globe and put our corporations there and overthrow democracies to sort of get our form of capitalism implemented.
But
We could
in terms
improve.
of, hold on. Colonization, I'm glad you bring that up. You talk about the way of life of these third world nations before they were colonized by Western powers. Do you know that when the British Empire outlawed slavery I believe it was in 1840, all right, regions around the world that never prior to that ever had any anti-slavery laws now found societies without slavery. So the colonization and the kind of what you call the imposition from Western powers seems to have been a massive boom to human rights. And I don't really respect like old tribal traditions. Many of them were extremely barbaric by all objective measures. They practice things like slavery, human sacrifice, what have you. It's it is a net benefit for people all around the world to adopt Western liberal values, in my view, because they can objectively be shown to lead to a better standard of life, more freedom, more equality, better tech. Pretty much by all objective measures, it's better to live in a Western nation. That's why people from the third world die trying to get to Western nations. Where you don't see people from Western nations immigrating to the third world.
Well, again, that's quite ignorant of the sort of history of the world. I mean, for one, like to say that, these the British Empire led the way in like abolishing slavery. It's like it ignores the fact that the British Empire was such an empire and such a power because of slavery, because of the fact they used and colonized the
yes they did
rest of the world.
practice slavery, but so did the nations they were colonizing. These nations also had their own forms of slavery.
The thing is with Loudmouth, it's a little bit different because with the slavery that Western powers did, it was based on race. The idea that they justified it by saying, "Oh, these people are less than human. They're not human. They're not the same as us. Therefore, they are better off being slaves." And subsequently indoctrinated their people into thinking this, and swept into these places and obviously enslaved them. But to suggest that these places were just backwards tribes cannibalizing people and stuff is entirely sort of to play into the rhetoric that the slavers sort of wanted you to. In reality, these places were in many ways further ahead than the Western world. We forget that in the times of the Dark Ages in Europe, loads of stuff was happening around the world. Loads of our ideas come from different parts of the world. Loads of our practices, our language, and to pretend as though the West just came and made everything better is just really ignores the history of the planet. Secondly, the slave, we have to look at why slavery in the form it happened and why it was continued for so long and why the after effects of slavery are still seen today. um and it comes down to making more profit, capitalizing on the commodified human being, the slave, having a form of free labor essentially to maximize profits, hence the extreme wealth of the colonial powers, which, going back to what you were saying, is why today our nations are considerably wealthier than the rest of the world combined. People don't just come, it's not as though like we just magically had all this wealth. We got it through destroying the rest of the planet essentially to do it. You have to look at the atrocities of the British Empire worldwide, where we've actively just massacred people for not submitting to our control, and stealing their resources, destroying their cultures, and for what? To make Britain, the royal family, the nobility, wealthier. And then centuries later, that wealth isn't just gonna like disappear. We're extremely wealthy now because of the colonialism that the previous generations did. And especially like when you consider that it didn't just go away, like the colonialism of old, the British Empire, and the colonial powers, the structures still maintained today through different practices. Through
Have you ever seen the British comedy movie from the late 70s, Monty Python's Life of Brian?
Yes, I have.
I think you know what scene I'm referring to. You remember the scene where they have this Jewish terrorist organization that want to rid the Roman Empire from their land, and they're like, "Well, what have the Romans ever? They steal our land, plunder our resources, and what have they ever done for us?" And one says, "The aqueduct." Oh, yeah, okay, they did give us that. What about the roads? Okay, yes, the roads go without saying. Well, what about that watchtower? That has severely reduced crime in the area. Okay, yes, but apart from the sanitation, the roads, medicine, education, public health, public health, the watchtower, what have the Romans ever done for us? You kind of get the joke it was saying there, right?
Yeah,
all right,
I understand that.
Complain
Yeah.
about a colonial power colonizing them, but when they're really honest with themselves, they really saw that the benefits of the Roman Empire definitely seemed to outweigh the detriments to that. The Roman Empire really did, when it colonized regions back in that day, really did build up the infrastructure of the places it colonized to a far more efficient, far more modern level than was ever seen previously at the time. The British Empire kind of worked similarly in many ways.
The British Empire improved infrastructure in those countries for themselves. Like you look at India, for instance, yeah, they built railways for the British Raj to use and the British ruling establishment to use. The average Indian, was never going to have a chance at accessing the cricket grounds or the facilities. They were the butlers and the servants and stuff. That's why that's why people criticize the empire. It's not like the resources and structures they put in were never to benefit everyone. They were to make the British Empire wealthier, make the capitalists wealthier.
Sure, they were, but ultimately, native populations did benefit from this in many ways. And that's not to say, of course, the British Empire did commit atrocities at the time period, but that was very standard for cultures at the time, like low-level colonized countries. They also were guilty of many acts that, in today's modern world, if you look at it from a modern lens, would definitely be seen as barbaric and horrific, but that was pretty much the standard view of the time. Really, what's very unique about the modern world is that we've really come so far in seeing these old, ancient practices in a negative light, because most of them were just standard. The conquest mindset was just the way of the world for thousands of years. For the vast majority of human history, it was pretty much just the tribe that was stronger would conquer the other tribe and enslave the population and plunder their resources. That pretty much was just the standard apparatus of human history.
Of course, yeah, I'm not denying that. That's like you say, the tribes have fought each other, people fighting for more control, but at the same time, A, that doesn't justify it, and B, if it's also wrong, and if we're able to recognize that it's wrong, why is it that we still have all this wealth which we've essentially plundered from them? We're still reaping the benefit from being at the top of this power system, having this hegemony over the rest of the globe. Why is it that our power governs and dictates over the rest of the world? We only have to look at what happens to countries that don't toe the line when it comes to free market capitalism. It doesn't privatize their land for corporations to come and put factories down. Why is it that the atrocities of the world are all recognized, apart from the economic and power structures which actually determine how people live? It's no one's saying that Britain was the only bad one, or France, or America. Of course not. Humanity for a majority of history hasn't been great to be around, but that doesn't change.
Ultimately, we are animals. At our core, we're still just upright apes with a more sophisticated society, and really the moving away from our kind of primitive animal roots is really it's really one of the most wonderful things about living in the modern world.
Of course. So let's have a system that reflects our progress and recognizes that no, we don't need to be treating each other like cogs, and we're all valuable and subsequently, not have this system which has all this wealth controlled and dictated by a handful of people in the West. And it's not even like it's everyone in the West. It's the wealthy in the West controlling essentially everything. You know, like there's no reason we should continue such a poor system, which is maintaining this hegemony, which is ultimately curtailing the efficiency and the well-being of people around the world.
But I don't see it as doing that. I really see it as basically taking that basic human conquest mindset of old and basically turning it into a system that doesn't plunder others, but makes wealth and becomes the top of the heap by instead creating for others. That's what I see. It takes our primitive animal instincts and uses them for good. That's what I see capitalism as. Whereas I see socialism or any other attempt to try to ignore this and try to like say, oh, we've moved beyond that. I see that as ultimately denying the reality of what makes humans humans. Ultimately, our empathy and our ability to like care for one another, it decreases the further you get away from the family unit. Basically, human empathy exists to regulate behavior among your family and your tribe. Obviously, if you don't take care of your children and don't love them very much, they're less likely to survive unless your genes are far more likely to not be passed on. And if you don't get along with other members of your tribe, you're likely to get booted out of your tribe, which will be certain death back in ancient times. Basically, and what capitalism does, it allows you, the wealth creators, to become big chief, not by stealing from other tribes or knocking another member of the tribe in the head, but instead by creating devices that people want, and through a voluntary exchange of goods and services, people working voluntarily, people buying things voluntarily, they can become rich, but by making my life better. I think my life is better that I have an iPhone that Steve Jobs invented and his team invented by trying to get rich. I think my life is improved, even though obviously, in all probability, I will never have even a fraction of the money Steve Jobs had.
But all of that is ignoring what we've just discussed. It's like, how is how is empathy, for just a family unit, a sign of making progress? We're clearly at a stage where we can think beyond. Oh, you must
We can
but
to more of an extent,
but to a massive extent more. Imagine saying to someone, "Oh, your family are the only people you're gonna have. That's it." Like,
well,
that's just not the case. People all the time, think, "Oh, my family aren't great people. I'm going to go and find people who are, make me happy and like good to be around." People
but
don't have
if
to
somebody who's
fit.
a family or friend of yours dies, okay, you feel a massive emotional effect from that you don't feel when you hear about 1,000 strangers being killed in a tragedy on the other side of the world. Clearly, your amount of empathy and caring is still much, much higher for your close friends and family than it is for the human race as a whole. But that is just how we are.
But that doesn't mean that we can't have a system which ensures people can all, not have to worry about, mass deaths and being deprived of their basic human rights. But some of the other stuff you mentioned, capitalism benefiting everyone. Well, no, it's actively stealing the value of other people's labor. The people who producing that iPhone you mentioned, it's not Steve Jobs, it's the workers, the labor of workers around the globe. It's the people who make it in the factories, the people who ship it over to the US, the people who sell it to you in the shop, the Amazon driver who, or not Amazon, the retail driver who delivers it to your house. All their labor goes into giving you and producing that phone. But Steve Jobs gets, or whoever, the shareholders of Apple and stuff, they get the wealth. They become the millionaires. They become the extremely wealthy people, whilst those workers are on a few dollars an hour, probably in some places in the world a few dollars a day, having to barely get by to make the people on the top wealthy. That's not progress. That's actively holding us back, because imagine how much more productive society could be if other people, if everyone had the opportunity and the chance to succeed, to just survive. But let's also think about the voluntary side of it. As you mentioned earlier, these factories in these parts of the world, if you don't, go and work at one of them, you're not going to have an income. You're going to be on the streets. You're going to be in that destitution you were sort of insinuating was there prior to the corporations arriving. That's
Because
not
it was.
on. But it wasn't though. Like these places around the world, it's not like there was just nothing there. Yeah, fine, we didn't have the exact like same style of civilization we had in the West, but they were still people. They're still aware of things. I think it's a little bit insulting, really, to sort of suggest that there was just mass it was like what Mad Max, and then the West showed up and was like, oh, here we go, have a factory. Oh wow, thanks guys. It's
Well,
like
it wasn't really Mad Max, but it's certainly things like diseases, childhood mortality were certainly all much higher prior to the West introducing things like modern medicines, electricity, dams to clean water, things like that. Really, these things did objectively improve the lives of people in those regions who got them from the West.
Actually, plenty of societies in Africa and Far East Asia and South America had, better sanitation than Europe or Western cities in Europe, like in what the Middle Ages and stuff.
Well, I'm not talking about the Middle Ages. I'm talking about the last few hundred years. Yes, in the Middle Ages, during the Dark Ages, yeah, parts of the Middle East and Far East were also probably more advanced in many ways than Europe. So yes, cultures outside of Europe. I'm not really saying that it was Europe that invented everything the rest of the world benefits from, but Europe certainly did invent some very key things that have benefited the whole world. That's why that's why I'm a big proponent of free trade. It allows cultures, if one culture invents something that's of benefit to the rest of the world, they can get rich off it, and you can sell it to the rest of the world, and everyone's life is improved by this.
But it's not the fact that they were European, that's why they did it. It's they happened to be in Europe and that's why they did it. That could have just as equally happened in another part of the world. It's just
it could have, but it happened mostly in Europe, though.
But it's the roll of the dice. It's just luck, and that's what we need to recognize. It's not as though Europe is just inherently better than the rest of the society. It's the the roll of the dice, roll of the die, favored the people in a certain region, and subsequently, because of that, the the colonial powers in Europe were the ones that colonized the world, were the ones where the wealth all funneled towards. And ultimately, because of all that wealth that happened there, because of the fact the people, the ruling class there had that money, it was easier for breakthroughs to happen there. So it's obvious if you can imagine if someone hands you like some paint and then the other person gets like a proper artist's MacBook or whatever, like who's going to produce better work? Like it's if you've got more resources in a specific place, it's no wonder more people, more academics, and more inventors are gonna be based there. So it's a little bit disingenuous.
I think it's more that Europe better fostered a more secular environment. Neil deGrasse lecture about the rise of kind of the golden age of science in the Middle East.
Sorry to cut you off, Loudmouth. You were buffering a little bit there. Like you cut out just briefly.
Am I still buffering?
Not anymore, I don't think. If you just
okay,
said, sorry, it like.
Sorry. Okay, I'll repeat that. Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson did a lecture a while back on the rise and fall of the golden age in the Middle Ages in the Middle East. He kind of talked about how they preserved a lot of ancient Roman literature and what have you, and how it was kind of once the hub of science, and then he showed how that eventually fell. It kind of fell because more traditionally religious Islamists started taking a more predominant role. He kind of clearly said that as a warning to the Western world not to listen to a religious fundamentalist. He kind of was winking at more people like Ken Ham when he did that, but he really shows that really is why Europe eventually got ahead, because particularly during the Renaissance period, more traditional religious voices come to have less influence, and more secular voices, a more free and open environment was created. And a lot of other countries are held back because they don't have that kind of free environment. That's what holds back the Islamic world. It's not because Arabic people or people in Islamic countries are genetically worse or anything like that. It's because they can't speak up. They don't have any freedom of speech or good education there, or you say the wrong thing, you might be accused of being a heretic and get your head chopped off. It's ultimately a secular environment and freedom of speech that leads to these advancements.
Of course, and it's terrible what's happening in many Middle Eastern countries. However, we can also tie this into our theories of colonialism and capitalism, because we have to remember many of the sort of debacles we're seeing in the Middle East have stemmed from European countries intervening to benefit their own capital. For instance, you only have to look at the history of America's interventions across the ages, across the decades in the Middle East, to see how they've essentially exploited the situation. They've overthrown countries to install US sympathetic regimes to give essentially hand oil and resources to American corporations and make them more profit. Sacrificing the potential grounds for progress, installing often incredibly conservative religious people who like you say crush the heretics and do all the terrible things in the name of like their warped version of how society should be operating. But the West doesn't care, because all of a sudden we get all this nice oil money, and we get nice cuts on our trade with them and stuff. It's all done to further the capital, and ultimately the lives of people in the Middle East are commodified, and made into a cut corner to benefit the capitalists of the West. It's why the Arab Spring, which should have been a great thing, should have been like people in the Middle East saying, no, we're tired of these fundamentalists sort of ruining our society.
Yeah, it didn't turn out that way, did it?
Exactly, but then you have to look at why, and it ultimately comes down to the fact that it was in the interests of capital to maintain the status quo, to say,
Not necessarily. It was more traditional religious voices winning out. Ultimately, these young people uprising, they were still ultimately religious Muslims, and they really didn't want a change from that system, because since the moment they could walk, they were indoctrinated with this kind of mindset, this worldview. This view of the world was always taught to them, and they don't want to move away from that. Even younger ones don't want to move away from that. Even Muslims in Europe, like young ones, will often still have backwards radical views. Like Richard Dawkins in his book, for example, on evolution, commented how the reason why his biology lectures and other biologists trying to teach people evolution has become more frowned upon in Europe has been the growing Islamic influence in those regions. The fact that they have far more traditional Muslims kind of replacing much more secular Europeans and wanting their own kind of religious dogma to not be questioned. And obviously, evolution is not compatible with Islam.
Yeah, that's not really the case, though, is it? Because the people, obviously the people who are left, like the governments who are installed after the Arab Spring, are going to be saying, oh, well, the young people, they wanted our government back, they wanted stability back. Of course, they're going to say that. That's the term of party line. The people who spoke out and said, oh no, we want change, are either off in, they're either keeping quiet, or they're off in some prison camp somewhere. It's like how the the polls in many of these countries are so high, and they all support all the laws because obviously they do, because if they don't, the police come and take you away or whatever. Like,
well,
that's
not all out of fear. A lot of them genuinely believe that this is the best society. They believe that God wants this kind of society.
Just as equally, there's lots of people fighting for change, and those people are being suppressed, and often they are being suppressed through the support of Western countries who are happier with those regimes if they maintain their capital, because ultimately these fundamentalists are they've got these capitalist elements in them. They're wanting to maintain their capital, and religion is just a tool to doing that. The fundamentalism is obviously bunk, but it's what's keeping them in control of these regions. But going on to what you were saying, I think it's a little bit sort of silly to take an extract from Richard Dawkins' or the book about saying, Muslims and their growing presence in Europe are ruining science, when in reality it's not so much Muslims but the growth of the far right, and the subsequent reversion or use of traditionalism to try and preserve the status quo, which is obviously fighting back against intellectualism, against academia, against science. You only
There
have
is
to look.
certainly an element of science denial among the reactionary right. I've spoken out against it quite a bit.
Well, exactly, but you have to look at why that's happening. Look at America. Why are there so many groups which, say, that vaccinations cause mental illnesses or whatever?
Yes, the anti-vaccine movement. I particularly despise the anti-vaccine movement because I myself have a high-functioning autism, Asperger's syndrome, and I find their conclusions offensive, not just because they're objectively wrong, just because vaccines do not cause autism, but let's say they did. Let's say vaccines did double your chance, a child's chance of getting autism. Is it really worse for a child to have autism than polio, smallpox, whooping cough?
Like, there's no,
right? Yeah.
Being nerd. Is it neurodivergent or is it the other one? Atypically divergent? I don't know what the term is, but having these different things, they're not negative. They're just different parts of humanity. And like you said, even if it was negative, you're gonna say, "Oh, I'd rather have my child dying of like easily curable diseases than have this fake like illness that I've conjured up." But
yeah, it's scary, but and actually, vaccine denial is a real dangerous thing. Like parts of the third world have actually like turned down vaccines because they've often believed not just anti-vax nonsense from the West, but a lot of it comes from within their own circles as well. And the result have been outbreaks of horrible diseases in their countries. And it's scary to me that with how amazing vaccines are, they're probably objectively, if you just view the growth of human life and human standard of living, vaccines might be the single greatest invention in the history of humanity. They have dramatically reduced childhood mortality. They're before the invention of them, a much higher percentage, I don't know the exact amount at the top of my head, but I know a much higher percentage of children died of these illnesses all the time.
Well, you're absolutely right. Vaccinations have to be up there. And regarding the people, these other countries sort of towing the line of anti-vaccination activists in the US, it's often like fundamentalist religious missionaries going over there and sort of teaching them loads of like really bad ideas. Like for instance, the abstinence only sex education missionaries to go over there and sort of like essentially tell them to do nothing to respond to the AIDS crisis, subsequently making it much worse.
Yes. I believe the Vatican had a huge role in that as well.
Exactly.
That problem.
These, going back to what I was saying, these anti-science groups, not just of this section, but of anti-climate change, all these various groups, they have they've got interest in their own capital. They've got often they own shares in rival medication companies, or they own shares in an oil company or something. They are using the political climate to benefit their own capital, which is ultimately yet another critique we can have of this system, where we're actively making our society worse by allowing capitalists to peddle complete bunk into society. Often capitalists who have extremely like wealthy donors and backers who can afford.
But do you think they should have their free speech suppressed? Like if they would say something that you or I would agree is complete bullshit. Like let's say, do you know who Ken Ham is?
Is he the Christian? I don't really know, to be honest.
He's in America. He's the creator of this ridiculous Ark encounter. which lives in Kentucky, kind of like the heartland of America. And he's a young Earth creationist that teaches kids that there were dinosaurs on the Ark, and that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. What's really funny is you go through his replica of Noah's Ark he created, and like an actual size replica. It's full of steel beams that help keep it together. I'm like, it's interesting that you need to use those, wasn't it? But where was I? Where was I getting at? But yeah, like fundamentalists like that have a big role in the heartland of America as well.
Mm. Well, yeah, like the fact that these people exist, these fundamentalists, isn't just because they're inherently like bad people. It's because they've seen the situation. They've seen, oh well, we're going to benefit our power, our capital, by exploiting the situation, by converting people into our absurd, horrible ideas about life.
Right. Yes, yes, peddlers of ignorance on the right and the left. And on the left, you have similar science denial among people who try to spread misinformation about genetically modified foods, saying that they like cause cancer and all this other nonsense. In reality, genetically modified foods are actually better for the environment because they require less cropland and less resources to do so. So it prevents deforestation, and less carbon is used to grow them, less fuel, thus it lowers carbon emissions. So that's just kind of another example of how, and they do this when they spread misinformation about GMOs in the name of the environment, but in reality, they're actually harming the environment by doing so.
Well,
and this is another great example where capitalism, all right, since it's capitalists and big food companies promoting this that are actually helping the environment, whereas more socially minded people who are with their misinformation are hurting.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's like a massive like, oh, the left is against improving our agricultural practices. It's obviously there's radical environmental
element on the left, not like the entire left, but that's a big element that is predominantly on the left.
It's people who have looked at an issue and thought, oh, if we just stop doing something, it will fix the problem, and subsequently it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Obviously it's not great, but I don't think it's anywhere near the scale as the problems I was discussing just now about like fundamentalist groups and stuff. But coming back to what we were saying, I think when we look at how the structures of power exist in our society, we have to look at how these groups have the power to influence so many people, to indoctrinate people into their absurd beliefs, to curtail science and progress in the name of their own wealth. And it comes from a system that is fundamentally about commodifying the world to make yourself profit, about capitalism, about exploiting things to benefit yourself. And if you remove that power structure, then suddenly this religious fundamentalist who's saying, oh, the world is flat, and whatever other rubbish they want you want to say, suddenly they've got no ground, because suddenly they don't have control of like a massive media broadcaster. Suddenly they don't have like a wealthy millionaire off in the middle of nowhere, like sort of funding their campaigns. Suddenly they can't send thousands of people over to Africa to go and teach people that condoms are like the devil's tools or whatever. Like it's suddenly you remove this axis of power, and you remove this element which allows people to act in the name of this. Suddenly,
that's what I meant by bringing up Ken Ham. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Would you, even though I find his views to be total bullshit, I would never want to silence him or the nonsense he spreads. I think he should be allowed to spread his nonsense, and I think it should be countered by real scientists who speak out against him. That's all right, and other purveyors of misinformation. Would you ever support, like, say, a law that were to say you can't teach pseudoscience on GMOs or on creationism or what have you? Do you think that should be allowed to be said?
Well, in terms of like, if like Ken Ham wants to have his like school of my crackpot theories about stuff, then yeah, he's allowed to do that. No one's like saying, oh no, you must not teach this. But in terms of like education, I think it's it's important we keep schools secular. Like, I
Well,
think
yes, I'm not talking about public education. And what I'm talking about is, all right, you talk about like misinformation on condoms being spread in the third world. Should there be like an effort to like suppress people saying this stuff, that misinformation that is possibly harmful?
Well, I think it's the conversation is all too often phrased a little bit poorly. It's not about the individual, it's about the system of power. In a functioning fair society, yeah, someone could be free to go to Africa and say this stuff, but then the people in Africa could be presented with a fair, equal counter argument saying, no,
Right.
this stuff that Ken Ham is saying is just, or whoever is going off to Africa is just, absolute bunk. It's people who quite clearly never, read a basic science book about reproduction and stuff, and facts win out. It's because of the axis of power that allows these people to never have access to the actual information and get brought up or educated by people with a clear agenda to further their own wealth or make people believe their pseudoscience and stuff. So it's about breaking down that axis of power. You can't. It's not going to work to just say, oh, we're going to ban you from doing this, because that what does that achieve? Oh, you've blocked one person. Suddenly, they actually can use that to their advantage by saying, oh, well,
Yeah, exactly. You create the Streisand effect.
yeah, exactly.
Like efforts to silence Milo Yiannopoulos over here have pretty much made the guy a celebrity. Whereas if most people just ignored him and these idiots wouldn't go to his rallies and shout him down, he probably would be a nobody no one would have heard of. But he's kind of become a celebrity because he seems to attract, my opinion, idiots who just want to shout him down, which just feels really childish to me. They're only ultimately helping the guy just so that they can throw a little tantrum about it.
Well, I feel as though that's a little bit different, because with Milo, some of the things Milo was doing were actively, directly really harmful. So, for instance, he was planning to dox some like undocumented immigrants. He showed a trans person's like pre HRT pictures and like
Yeah, I
misgendering.
remember him doing that. He like doxed a trans person, like outed them in the crowd. That was a really scumbag move, wasn't it?
Exactly, and it's like, why people are gonna protest that, and rightfully so. Milo is quite clearly a scumbag.
Well, I think he is kind of a scumbag, but at the same time, the people like really shouting him down have essentially made him a martyr. A lot of people are like, I may not like the guy, but those people shouting him down, they're a bunch of dumbasses. We got to support this guy because I support free speech. That's why trying to silence people like that really is counterproductive. He's not
losing his free speech. He's the point was to get him off the campus, and he's not losing. He's losing the platform, yeah, but he was using that platform to actively endanger other members of society. So yeah, it's good to get him off there, and it's important that we value marginalized people over some bigot trying to ruin their lives like Milo was. And I think there's a key difference in the sort of equating not putting in anti-speech laws and letting people protest and voice their dissent. Milo isn't losing his free speech. He's you can still use the internet. What's being protested is the fact that universities just invite this guy along to go and like have, oh, haha, look at these trans people, haha, they're so like ugly. Oh, look at these immigrants, haha.
Well, I mean, if he's actively that, you can guard it as dick behavior, but ultimately that doesn't really endanger anyone. You mentioned that he was doxing somebody. That legitimately could danger somebody. So that if he was doing that or putting out information that could lead to them being harmed, then that would be an area where I could actually legitimately say that he should be prevented from saying this. But if he's really just doing that, like poking fun at them for being ugly, that's low class behavior, but at the same time, it doesn't really put anyone in danger.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit different with marginalized groups. The axis of power is very much against them, hence their marginalization. With trans people, you already got to consider that lots of people don't consider them who they say they are. You've got the whole there's a lot of transphobia in society. Milo is playing along that by making fun of someone for quote unquote not looking like who they say they are. Thus inciting further harassment, and harassment can often lead to violence and murder. And
it's a bit of a stretch to say that because he made fun of this guy's inciting murder. It's kind of a stretch, dude.
You can imagine though, if you're already belonging to a social group which is already quite marginalized, it's got a government which is actively sort of scaling back your protections and rights, which are already pretty limited to begin with.
Like
and
if somebody, even though I'm autistic, if somebody uses autistic as a slur, I sometimes get annoyed by that a little bit, but I don't view it as like a threat to my life.
But it's a bit different though, isn't it? Because firstly, that doesn't make ableism isn't right, even if it isn't on the same scale. But you imagine like a national sort of, someone who's quite well known, because he is, Milo Yiannopoulos is sadly a well-known guy, coming to your university, putting your image up on a massive screen, like making jokes at your expense, misgendering them, all these things, and in the context of society, showing this to your hundreds of thousands of fans. That's pretty scary. Harassment is, fine. They're not actively killing you, but that's still a massive thing. That's still not on. And that's still something which can have serious effects on people's mental health and well-being. Um, and like to use the example of autism. Imagine if someone had gone up on the stage and be like, "Oh, look at this autistic person! Haha, what a loser!" And like you had a massive audience of people laughing and stuff. And maybe because like with autism, if it's not like most autistic people, or it's a spectrum, isn't it? It's like most, you can't just look at someone and be like, "Oh, they're autistic." It's not something like that. Thus, it's not the same type as like discrimination as, say, trans people, where lots of people have sadly got preconceptions as to how gender roles should appear, and subsequently, lots of trans people are bullied and harassed and stuff based on that. Hence, Milo, putting them up on the screen, is such a big deal. And people are going to rightfully say, no, we're not having that on our campus. We value the lives of our trans brothers and sisters over some scumbag getting all his buddies to make fun of trans people and dox immigrants and stuff. So they protested, and they kicked him off. But frankly, that's good, because it stops in the immediate vicinity. It stops that the broadcasting.
It doesn't. It just brings more attention to him. There's really no such. I kind of take the role, particularly running a YouTube channel. There's not really any such thing for your channel as bad attention. Like, it's better to get a bunch of hate clicks on your YouTube channel than get no clicks at all, or because ultimately that helps your channel's metrics. And it's kind of similar to any provocateur in media figures. Like, negative attention is much better than no attention if your goal is clearly as his is to just kind of make a name for yourself and be a provocateur.
Of course, but they still, like, if they hadn't have protested, he still would have done it. And potentially he's got this massive brewing crowd of right wing, far right, alt right, whatever people baying for oh, let's dox these immigrants, let's laugh at these trans people. That's
I've made jokes at people's expense, but I've certainly strongly condemned doxing on my channel quite a few times.
Sorry?
Well, on my channel, I've definitely strongly condemned doxing several times, so it's a very important issue to me.
Exactly. And even with the jokes, like the societal context around them, clearly makes it more than just a joke. When you see Milo, in the same breath as like making fun of their appearance, also saying they're mentally ill and saying they shouldn't be part of queer circles and saying they're men in dresses. It's like all these things linked together, and that's why ultimately his views left unchallenged, and other people like him with his views just left to grow and grow and grow, culminate in a society where it's not safe for trans people to be, which is ultimately why people are so firm in their resistance to him, by saying, no, we're not having you on our campus. And coming back to the overall point, that's not Milo losing his free speech. It's losing his his platform, which he has no right to. Imagine if someone showed up at your house and was like, "Oh, I'm here to give a speech about why."
Well, no, that's very different, because my house is my private property. This was a public university, so it is very different than that.
Well, the thing is, though, you couldn't just like show up at a university hall and be like, "Oh, I'm speaking here." Like, it's still the universities, and they could
Well, yeah, but a
still.
university, they're not allowed to restrict people if they get public funding. They have to follow the rules of the First Amendment, whereas private entities can restrict you. Like YouTube can delete either of our channels, and since it's their private platform that they own, it wouldn't really violate the First Amendment. It might violate the spirit of the First Amendment, and I wouldn't support anything like that, but it wouldn't really, it violates the legal letter. Whereas a public university, since they take public funds, there it would. So it's very different. And in our country, the First Amendment is something we really strongly revere.
Oh, of course. But the thing is, though, there's also the point of, the law and, the rules are not always just. It's not the same thing as justice. And I don't think it's not a loss of free speech to not be, not be given a platform at a university. And yeah, fine, it's publicly funded, but what's he using his platform for? To, to further his harassment and attempted doxing even of groups he wants
Right.
to alienate in society.
We've kind of lingered on Milo for. I just kind of brought him up as an example of the Dunning Kruger effect, basically.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to point out that you can like inadvertently help somebody when you're trying to hurt them. It can. There's kind of like the Streisand effect. I think they call that.
Yeah, because Barbara Streisand, did she have an affair and wanted it out of the papers? And
Yeah, and it ended up getting it published a lot more. That's the thing; it had the exact opposite effect, and kind of I feel like, and shouting down Milo also has the exact opposite effect. The Streisand effect is very much in play. Like if a big channel starts really strongly attacking a smaller one, for example, it'll in all likelihood often help their metrics grow just because you're bringing them attention. And like I said, there's no such thing as bad attention in certain areas.
exactly, or like that's exactly like that. Anyway, we've been going for
Yeah,
about a
yeah, I'm ready
minute.
to end this, but it was a
Um,
good chat. It was good talking to you.
no, it was nice. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
nice
yeah,
and
we
pleasant.
got into a lot of different cool topics.
Exactly. And
Yes.
it was nice to keep it nice and polite and stuff and amiable.
Yes, I always try to. I try to have civil conversations with people I disagree with. Yeah, because civility, I think, is all too often lost in our modern world and our a very charged political climate.
Yeah, it's important
It,
to speak to people and stuff.
yes, exactly.
Anyway, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you for joining me, Loudmouth, and till next time. Thanks again, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Subscribe to